Let's turn now to the tariff retreat that has the whole world talking. This has been a monumental U-turn from Donald Trump. He has pressed the 90-day pause button on his tariffs, but there will now still be a base 10% tariff. Here was the president rationalising this shock move.
Somebody had to do what we did, and I did a 90-day pause for the people that didn't retaliate, because I told them if you retaliate, we're going to double it. And that's what I did with China.
Yep, so as he says, China will still have the full weight of the tariffs.
As I told everyone a week ago, they're in this very spot. Do not retaliate, and you will be rewarded. So every country in the world who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you. We're going to go down to a 10% baseline tariff for them. And China will be raised to 125 due to their insistence on escalation.
And that's, of course, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent there. Well, let's bring you now Institute of Public Affairs Chief Economist Adam Creighton. Adam, great to see you as always. Look, this has been the most roller coaster of a two-week period on these tariffs. Donald Trump did tell reporters that he pulled back on these tariffs because people were, quote, yippee, and afraid of the stock market volatility. Is this his logic here, or what's happened behind the scenes?
Well, look, certainly Donald Trump supporters think it's the art of the deal, and his critics think that it's the art of the dill. But no one really knows here, you know, what the actual reasoning was behind the scenes. But look, certainly I think Trump is coming out of it reasonably well so far. He's got this 10% tariff floor so far, which is applying to all imports into the US. That's about $380 billion a year of extra revenue, which the US can sorely need, of course, given the $2 trillion annual budget deficit that it has. So I think it's going fairly well for him. Fairly well for him.
Well, certainly not in the media. Would Elon Musk have played into this?
Well, not in the media, but this...
Yeah, continue.
Sorry, go on.
Continue. What were you going to say? Not in the media?
There's so much focus on the stock... No, there's so much focus on the stock market, but really there's too much focus on the stock market, I would say. It's not really a good indication of the real economy. What matters for Trump and his supporters is that jobs are brought back to the US. Now, it remains to be seen whether these tariffs are the solution to that, but we have to give it a chance to work, I would say.
Yeah. I'll get to some of the unintended consequences in the moment, the issue with the debt market. But first, I want to ask you about Elon Musk. We saw he came out publicly against Trump's trade advisor, Pete Navarro, said very public insults about him. So clearly, Elon Musk was against the tariffs. Now, you'd have to say that Donald Trump is ultimately against tariffs as well. He was trying to, get the base down to no tariffs on both sides. But do you think Elon Musk's push also... Trump donors like Bill Ackman, he said there should be a 90-day pause. Would these sort of figures have influenced the president's thinking?
Well, I think one of the things that's come out of all this is that Trump is not in the pocket of Wall Street. That's how he's caricatured all the time by the left. But of course, for the last fortnight, it's been chaos on Wall Street. It's been chaos for stock investors. I mean, he's smashed their returns. They're still down by 7 or 8%, even though there's been a recent rebound. So I think it's smashed that. There is obviously disagreement amongst his supporters, Elon Musk on the one side, Peter Navarro on the other side. But I think it's healthy that all of these debates are out in the open and that people can see them. I mean, it seems Trump's crosshairs are still very much on China. The trade deficit with China has fallen quite a bit, by the way. It was $420 billion roughly in 2018. It's something like $260 billion now. And the tariffs still remain on China. I think more than 120%, which is highly disruptive, and is probably going to lead to imports into the US from third countries, I would say.
So I want to return to this issue with the debt bonds, because there's been so much focus on market volatility, and yep, it's still down, but the reality is markets do go up and down. They react to news. There are panicked investors. But this issue with the debt bonds is far more serious. Can you tell me about how that could play out for the US with China?
Yeah, certainly the bond markets have been just as volatile as the stock markets, even though they don't get as much attention in the press. I mean, it's interesting in recent days, the US government 10-year bond yields been even higher than Australia's, I think about 4.5 by 4.3. The concern here is that China is a big holder, relatively large holder of US government debt, and that in a fit of pique or anger, it may decide to sell some of those bonds, which of course would put up their 10-year bond yield. But the reality is, if you look at the actual ownership, I think, and this is my view, China simply doesn't own enough to be a huge problem for the US. It owns about 10% of the outstanding stock of US bonds that are held by foreigners, and 2% of the actual total. So I think it's very unlikely that China will sell, will suddenly try to sell its US government bonds, because of course it itself would make capital losses, very significant capital losses. And it is the most liquid asset in the world. So look, there is a concern that foreigners could dump US government bonds. And of course, the US government is extremely susceptible to that because it has $36 trillion of debt. It's borrowing about $2 trillion every single year. So it is susceptible, but I don't think that China's will press the big red button on that.
Well, another economist I spoke to off-air last night, Warren Hogan, was worried about this and said it could impact on US continuing to meet its debt repayments. But anyway, I guess we'll see how that plays out with China.
It could. Who knows? No one knows what's happening. No one knows what's happening.
Adam Creighton, love having you on as always. Thanks for your time.